What's up, everybody in YouTube land? This will be part 2 of my Sabbath Rest is the Best series. There are a lot of believers out there who like to spiritualize away parts of the Torah, but is the Torah spiritual? Do we honor Sukkot or Feast of Tabernacles in the spirit? Do we eat the meats that Yahweh commands us to eat in the spirit? And lastly, do we honor Shabbat in the spirit? No, we do all these in our flesh. We might get some spiritual rest on Sabbath, but we definitely get physical rest on Sabbath. Sabbath rest is the best. This is so true. There's nothing like getting a good night's rest on Sabbath. I usually get better rest on Sabbath than any other day of the week. Amazing how that works. Let's look at a few people that honor Sabbath in the scriptures, Paul being one of them. We'll read Acts 13:14 through 17. But passing through from Perg, they came to Antioch in Pisidia, and went into the congregation on the Sabbath day, and sat down. And after reading of the Torah and the prophets, the rulers of the congregation sent to them, saying, Men and brothers, if you have any word of encouragement for the people, speak. And Shaul, standing up and motioning his hand with his hand, said, Men, Israelites, and those fearing Elohim, listen. The Elohim of this people, Israel, did choose our fathers, and exalted the people in their sojourning in the land of Mitzrayim. And with a high arm he brought them out. Acts 17:2 says, And according to his practice, Shaul went in unto them, and for 3 Sabbaths was reasoning with them from the Scriptures. Acts 18:1 through 4 says, And after this Shaul left Athens and went to Corinth, and he found a certain Yehudite named Aquilus, born in Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Yehudim to leave Rome, and he came to them. And because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and was working, for they were tent makers by trade. And he was reasoning in the congregation every Sabbath, and won over both Yehudim and Greeks. Paul honored Sabbath. We can see that from these verses in Acts. It doesn't make a lot of sense for him to be a Sabbath keeper and turn around and teach against it in other places in his writings. Another person that kept Sabbath was Mary Magdalene. Whoop-de-doo. Mary Magdalene kept Sabbath. What's the significance of that? A lot. I'm going to start reading Luke 23, verse 33 through 38. Verse 33. And when they had come to the place called Golgotha, I believe it says Calvary in the King James, they impaled him there, and the evildoers, one on the right hand, the other on the left. And Yeshua said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. They divided his garments and cast lots. And the people were standing looking on, and the rulers also were sneering with them, saying, He said, He saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Messiah, the chosen of Elohim. And the soldiers were mocking him too, coming and offering him sour wine, and saying, If you are the sovereign of the Yehudim, save yourself. And there was also an inscription written over him in letters of Greek, Roman, and Hebrew, This is the sovereign of the Yehudim. It's pretty clear this is the Messiah's crucifixion. So let's go to the end of the chapter 23, read verses 53 through 56. And taking it down, he wrapped it in linen, and laid it in a tomb hewn out of the rock, where no one was yet laid. And it was preparation day, and the Sabbath was approaching. And the women who had come with him from Galilee followed after, and saw the tomb, and how his body was laid. And having returned, they prepared spices and perfumes, and they rested on the Sabbath according to the command. So what's the significance of these verses? There are some folks out there that will say the law is done away with because it was nailed to the cross. The Messiah was dead when these folks observed Sabbath. They observed Sabbath after the Messiah died. So that contradicts that teaching. That disproves it. The Torah of Yahweh is not done away with. It's still in effect in 2012. Since I'm discussing the topic of Sabbath, did Yeshua keep the weekly Sabbath? Did he go to church every Sunday to worship the Lord or praise God? Nope. If he did, he would have broke Torah and been a sinner and not been perfect. Luke 4:16 says, And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and according to his practice, he went into the congregation on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. Mark 1:21 says, "And they went into Kephar Nahum, and immediately on the Sabbath he went into the congregation and taught." Other examples of Yeshua's Sabbath observance are in Mark 6:2, Luke 4:31, Luke 6:6, Luke 13:10, Luke 14:1, John 5:1-16, and John chapter 9. Question: in the King James Version, how many times does the phrase first day of the week appear in the New Testament? 8 times. What about the word Sabbath? 55 times. Just like the Old Testament believers, the New Testament believers were honoring Sabbath. There are no examples of believers going to church on Sunday in the New Testament. Sorry, it's not there. Let's take a look at some of the scriptures in the New Testament that talks about the Sabbath. I'm going to read a good chunk of Hebrews 3 and Hebrews 4. Hebrews 3:1. "Therefore, set apart brothers, partakers of the heavenly calling, closely consider the emissary and high priest of our confession, Messiah, Yeshua, who is trustworthy to him who appointed him, as also Moshe and all his house. For this one has been deemed worthy of more esteem than Moshe, as much as he who built the house enjoys more respect than the house. For every house is built by someone, but he who built all is Elohim. And Moshe indeed was trustworthy in all his house as a servant, for a witness of what will be spoken later. But Messiah is a son over his own house, whose house we are if we hold fast the boldness and the boasting of the expectation firm to the end. Therefore, as the set-apart Spirit says, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion, in the day of the trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tried me, proved me, and my works 40 years. Therefore I was grieved with that generation and said, they always go astray in their heart, and they have not known my ways, as I swore in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest. Look out, brothers, lest there be any of you of a wicked heart of unbelief and falling away from the living Elohim. But encourage one another daily, while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For we have become partakers of Messiah, if we hold fast the beginning of our trust firm to the end. While it is said, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, as in the rebellion. For who, having heard, rebelled? Was it not all who came out of Mitzrayim, led by Moshe? And with whom was he grieved 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose corpses fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter into his rest, but to those that did not obey? So we see that they were unable to enter in because of unbelief. Chapter 4, verse 1. Therefore, since a promise remains of entering into rest, his rest, let us fear lest any of you seem to have come short of it. For indeed the good news was brought to us as well to them. But the word which they heard did not profit them, not having been mixed with belief in those who heard it. For we who have believed do enter into that rest, as he has said, as I swore in my wrath, if they should enter into my rest, and yet his works have come into being from the foundation of the world. For somewhere he has said thus about the seventh day, and Elohim rested on the seventh day from all his works. And in this again, if they shall enter into my rest, since then it remains for some to enter into it, and those who formerly received the good news did not enter in because of disobedience. He again defines that certain day, today, saying through Dawid so much later, as it has been said, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Yehoshua had given them rest, he would not have spoken of another day after that. Here's the key verse in this whole reading. This verse is so overlooked by believers. That's for folks that say law is done away with, we don't have to keep Sabbaths and all that good stuff. Verse 9, Hebrews 4:9. So there remains a Sabbath keeping for the people of Elohim. This is after the Messiah is dead. Verse 10. For the one having entered into his rest has himself also rested from his works, as Elohim rested from his own. Let us therefore do our utmost to enter into that rest, lest anyone fall after the same example of disobedience. I'll read verse 9 one more time. So there remains a Sabbath keeping for the people of Elohim. Do we want to follow the example of ancient Israel? Personally, I'll pass on that one. I'd rather follow Yahshua's example. Shalom.